Generally, I don't think the press does such a great job of covering this country. Ronald Reagan changed America irrevocably. And yet during the Reagan years, we wrote very little about how he was changing America. We really went along for many years with the notion that people in Eastern Europe were pretty happy. We were wrong. How do we miss that story?
And why was Watergate an anomaly for you?
I think it was an anomaly because it went against all conventional wisdom that the Nixon people were behind Watergate. It's not about being hard or soft. It's about being thoughtful. I think it's an anomaly. I think that that really effective, I don't want to toot our own horn here, but I think that, Vietnam was an anomaly in terms of the role of the press. Generally, I don't think the press does such a great job of covering this country, particularly in Washington. And what we did was not that exotic. It was kind of wearing out a lot of shoe leather. It was kind of basic reporting, but it was effective. That's unusual.
Do you see it being done now?
Not enough. I think that there's, this is a very hard town to read, Washington, if you're in it. And there's the appearance of a lot of motion and a lot of significant goings on, when in fact I think there's a lot less. And in fact, the real stories, I think, tend to be those that we don't write about. I mean, Ronald Reagan changed America irrevocably. And yet during the Reagan years, we wrote very little about how he was changing America. We were focused on aspects of the legislative process and who's going to be the next undersecretary of whatever, when in fact, when it was all over, our country had changed. And as journalists, we hadn't written very much about it. I think I tend to be a critic of how well we're covering the country.
Do you sense that the American press has gone soft?
I think that's too simple. I don't think. I think that there is, in fact, that there are a lot of people in the American press with a kind of bulldog attitude about nonsense. There are all these gossip columnists calling people up and saying, "Is it true? Was it tissue of lies that you were at the movie theater on that date?" And it's all about nothing. I don't think it's about toughness. I think what good journalism is about is understanding what's going on in our society, in our government. How does it relate to people? I think somehow that we've lost. I'm gonna start this answer over a little bit. Let you cut in here. I'm not being terribly articulate here.
The question, it was excellent actually. I was very happy.
But you can take up what you want out of it up till then.
But I mean, the question was, have the American press gone soft, in your view?
Again, I don't think soft is the right word. I don't think we're thoughtful enough. I think the best thing I can think of is to look at the condition of this country. That, to me, is the great story of our time right now. The condition of this country, in many respects, is hellish. Our cities, our education system, our infrastructure, and yet our coverage of government somehow doesn't interact with the reality of the condition of our country. Somehow the two have to come together, and there has to be some perspective about that. If you're covering George Bush, it seems to me that a good part of the story about George Bush is why aren't we doing anything about the problems of our country? And why isn't that on the front page every day or on the evening news every day about how it is that, for instance, that right now we're talking about whether or not to fund aid to the Soviet Union, which obviously we're not going to a great extent. And at the same time, where's the debate about funding our, the renewal of our own country? How does journalism deal with what's in front of our face? We missed, the world's press missed, the whole story, not of Eastern Europe falling or the fall of communism, but rather we really went along for many years with the notion the people in Eastern Europe were pretty happy. We were wrong. How do we miss that story? It's back to what you mentioned Baghdad to me. I went to Baghdad, and what I wrote about in Baghdad, which astonished me, was that the people of, and this was 4 months before the war started, and nobody had written this, the people in Baghdad said to me, hey, we don't like this man, we don't like Saddam Hussein, we don't like his annexation of Kuwait, he's been a disaster for us since the war in Iraq. They were whispering about this. I mean, it seems to me that often the story is that I didn't do anything exotic in Baghdad. I did what I always did. I knocked on some doors. And that we need to listen more as journalists. You know, what David Halberstam did in Vietnam was he listened. What we did in Watergate was we listened to people. We didn't, I can't tell you, I bet you I've been interviewed maybe a couple thousand times since Watergate. And the number of journalists who just come in with a question and walk out with a preconceived notion of what the story is, what I'm going to say, without, people surprise you when you listen. Reporters don't stick around enough, it seems to me. That they're in and out. They're in a big hurry to put the conclusions that they already think they know. I don't want to generalize too much very often.
Listening to what you're saying, I mean, earlier on you were saying that Watergate was an anomaly. And why was Watergate an anomaly for you, in terms of what the American press is doing?
I think it was an anomaly because, and this gets to Bradlee as well, that let me think about this for a second. I think it was an anomaly because it went against all conventional wisdom. That the Nixon people were behind Watergate, and once we knew that they were behind Watergate, that it really was about something much greater than the mere break-in, but of course was about all of these secret undercover activities that had been undertaken by the Nixon administration and the cover-up to hide those activities, not the mere break-in at Watergate, these illegal, unconstitutional activities. It went against conventional wisdom that kind of thing went on. And what we don't do in the pack journalism that really governs to a certain extent the way journalism is practiced in this town particularly, is go up against conventional wisdom. That we don't challenge that. And the conventional wisdom is largely the product of the press to begin with. And the result is, you know, you don't find out what's really going on until you ask some sometimes obstreperous questions. But it's not about being hard or soft. It's about being thoughtful. It's about using intelligence in a way often that tells you that the conventional wisdom doesn't make any sense. The conventional wisdom in Watergate made no sense. Because in fact, somebody, either the intelligence community or the White House, if logic really were to prevail, was behind this thing. And indeed, I thought originally it was the intelligence community. Well, I was wrong. It turned out to be Richard Nixon. But we accept conventional wisdom as journalists. And I think it's very damaging. And with Ben Bradlee, I think Ben is really the great editor of our time for many reasons, and he's left a mark on his time in a way that no editor has, I think, and a mark on his country, not just on journalism. And I think it's a result partly of what I'm talking about, of not accepting conventional wisdom. That Ben drew around him, in fact, many people, beginning with an editor now dead, a wonderful man named Larry Stern, who had a very unconventional view of Larry was a radical. Ben, unlike other editors, was willing to have around him people with unconventional interpretations of the way business happens in this town. And that is the real departure, and that's, I think, his great contribution, because we were able to challenge the conventional wisdom in all kinds of ways, including the conventional wisdom of what journalism is. The style section that Ben Bradlee created said, wait a minute, there's no reason for the conventional wisdom that we write about the women's issues and then we bury the cultural thing in some other part. Let's meld all this together and create a daily magazine. Well, now, of course, all over America, good newspapers produce great daily magazines. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, these style sections, they're great daily magazines. They're one of the reasons that magazines are in some trouble.
We've gone in at the end, and I'm going to go back to the beginning now. It's terrific from my perspective. Do you, let's talk very briefly about Ben Bradlee. What was he like to work for? I mean, this gruff, rather offhand character, I remember vividly dismisses you in the movie,
right,
as you know, he's effectively saying to you, get out of here until you got the story. Was Ben Bradlee like that?
Yeah. That's not too bad a way to be. I'm still a little bit like that. I still sometimes like to talk with editors a little too much about where I think the story is going without getting it down on paper. You know, get the damn thing down on paper. Ben doesn't have much use. You'll often see him make that gesture, and he doesn't have much use for it. He knows when he sees something that's good, and he's very open to, again, unconventional good work. You know, when I went to the Washington Post, the quality of writing at the Washington Post when I went there in 1966 was appalling. The Washington Star had much better writers. Ben, who was anything but an elegant writer, as I'm sure he'll tell you, nonetheless, over time drew great writers, real writers, to the Washington Post.